Living in the Australian outback has its privileges. Clean air, that eucalyptus scent that seems tailor-made to cleanse the soul, and the tranquility of waking up to the sounds of nature. Birds singing, chooks scratching, and occasionally the lazy moo of a cow that clearly has no hurry for anything. I've always enjoyed that. Life on the farm isn't easy, but it's honest, and until recently it was also stress-free. But then, she arrived. The new neighbor. The Karen. Or rather, the Bogan Karen. She appeared out of nowhere. One day the house next door was empty. The next there was an old ute parked on the lawn, boxes scattered on the porch, and a woman with a judging gaze planted at the fence, as if she already had an opinion about everything, including me, even without ever exchanging a word. The first interaction didn't take long. I was driving the tractor at 7 in the morning on a Saturday, slashing a patch of land where the weeds were starting to stage a rebellion. Common work, nothing out of the ordinary. But as soon as the engine roared, she burst out of the house as if she'd been expelled from bed by a fire alarm. She came out in thongs, a bathrobe, and a cup of coffee in hand, which nearly slipped with every hurried step. "Do you have any idea how noisy that is?" was her welcome phrase. No "good morning," no "I'm your new neighbor," nothing. She launched straight into a verbal attack. I responded, trying to maintain civility. I explained that this was part of my work, that the area was rural, and that noises like this were to be expected. But she wasn't there to listen to explanation. She was there to complain. And before I knew it, I was listening to a monologue about mutual respect, noise pollution, and the right to peace. Of course, I tried to be polite. Deep down, I thought she was just a stressed person dealing with the move, perhaps tired of the big city. Maybe she was still adjusting to the new pace. But it didn't take long to realize that was just the tip of the iceberg. In the following days, she began to make her presence felt more and more, but not in a good way, more like present, watching everything you do as if she were an unsolicited rural patrol. If I fired up a chainsaw, she peeked through the window. If I rode past on the quad bike, she was on the porch with her arms crossed, and every time I used the radio to talk to my workers, there she was, looking on with that disapproving gaze mixed with, "I know more than you." But it was on some random morning that I realized things were taking a strange turn. I found my fence with a red ribbon tied to one of the wooden posts, one of those caution tapes used on construction sites. I found it bizarre, went to check, and came across a note taped on, "This fence is encroaching 10 centimeters onto my property. Please remove it immediately." I stopped, read it again, repeated it aloud. 10 centimeters, in the middle of the bush, on a fence that had been there for over 20 years. Who measures that? Who cares about that? Well, Karen cares. From that point on, she began measuring everything, literally, with a tape measure. One day I came home from the supermarket and found her at the boundary of her property with a notebook in hand, jotting down measurements as if she were preparing a report for NASA. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a neighbor complaining. It was the beginning of a cold war over rural property. And you know, if I thought this was the weird part of the story, I had no idea what was still to come. If the first contact with Karen seemed strange, what followed was practically an episode of a rural reality show, just without a prize at the end and a lot of headaches. The woman wasn't just annoyed, she was obsessed. And unlike your average annoying neighbor, Bogan Karen took the art of intrusion to Olympic levels. It started almost comically, with her walking along the edge of her property, and sometimes mine too, with a tape measure in hand, and an expression as if she had been hired by the council to inspect the alignment of the properties in the area. Early in the morning, in the afternoon, and sometimes even at night with a torch, as if she were on a military reconnaissance mission. All this to try to prove that my fence extended a few centimeters beyond what she deemed acceptable. One day I came home from the supermarket and came face to face with her in my yard. Yes, in my yard. She had crossed over the fence, the one that was wrong, and was there, standing, looking at the ground with the tape measure open and jotting things down in a notebook that looked like it had come out of a poorly solved geometry class. When I questioned what she was doing, she responded with an authoritative tone that sounded more like a B-grade environmental officer. "I'm just collecting evidence for a possible lawsuit. You can continue what you were doing." I took a deep breath, looked around. This was surreal. She had invaded my property, was measuring my things, and was telling me to carry on with my day as if she were the center of the universe. The problem is, it didn't stop there. The next day, she showed up with signs. Yes, signs. 2 of them, reading in big red letters, "Private property, do not trespass," hammered on either side of the fence, but on my side of the fence, the audacity was through the roof. By this point, the neighbors were starting to comment. One of them, who lives 2 farms down, came over to laugh and said, "Mate, this woman needs a hobby, or a good psychiatrist." I laughed on the outside, but inside I was already worried. She clearly had issues, and worse, she was willing to play the troublemaker to the end. As if the tape measure and the signs weren't enough, she started using her phone as a surveillance tool. Every time I drove the tractor near the fence, there she was, filming. Sometimes she wouldn't even wait for me to pass. She would just stand there, phone in hand, recording nothing. Or maybe trying to catch the wind changing direction and bringing invasive dust into her property. Even my music became a reason for complaint. One afternoon, I played some ambient sound in the shed. Not loud, just enough to keep the rhythm of the work. 30 minutes later, I received a message on my phone. It was from her number. I had never given her my number, of course, but she found it. The message read, "This type of sound is not appropriate for a rural area. Have more consideration." I swear at that moment I had to laugh. Because who sends a message complaining about music in the middle of the bush? The woman really thought she lived in a luxury condo in Melbourne, not in the heart of the Australian bush. After that, she started employing what I called silent haunting tactic. She would stand still at the edge of her property, staring intently, not saying a word, sometimes with her arms crossed, other times with a cup of tea, but always with that look of, "I'm watching you." Once, I spent 5 minutes just observing to see if she moved. Nothing. She looked like a statue, a judging statue of pure disdain. Of course I tried to resolve it civilly. I sent her a cease and desist letter asking her to stop invading my land. Her response? A handwritten letter, full of spelling mistakes, saying that she had the right to protect her property, and that every action generates a reaction. It was starting to sound like a threat. And that's when the tension went from uncomfortable to a dangerously thin line between ridiculous and dangerous. Something told me that Karen wasn't going to stop until she did something big, something stupid, something that could be the point of no return. And look, I was right. When you live in the bush, far from the city, you learn to deal with a lot of things. Extreme heat, surprise floods, spiders the size of dessert plates, but none of that prepares someone for a Karen determined to sabotage your rural life. After weeks of passive-aggressive drama, measuring tapes, invasive signs, and freezing glares worthy of a horror movie, the absurd tension escalated to a dangerously real level. It all started on a Friday night. It had been a long workday. I fixed the shed, maintained the irrigation system, and in the late afternoon decided to have a barbecue with the team that helps me on the farm. Nothing big, just meat, beer, and idle chatter. But apparently any activity involving happiness deeply bothered Karen. During the party, we noticed some lights moving near the fence. You know that kind of strange movement that makes you stop laughing for a second and think, is someone poking around there? Well, we were distracted, and since it was common to see kangaroos or possums around at night, we let it slide. The problem came the next morning. I woke up to a strange silence. A silence abnormal. The fridge was silent. The lights wouldn't turn on. The router wasn't blinking. And the strangest thing, the irrigation pump, which runs on an electric system, was off. I felt a chill. I ran outside and started following the wires connecting the main generator to the shed. That's when I saw it. The thick, reinforced cables were cut, and it wasn't an accidental cut, like a tractor ran over it. It was a clean cut, made with the proper tool. Someone had intentionally gone there, in the dark of night, and cut the power supply wires that kept most of the property running. I stood there, staring at it, trying to process. It couldn't be a coincidence, not an accident, and only one person in the world had the motive, or rather, the paranoid motivation, to do this: Karen. The woman had finally crossed the line between irritation and crime. The damages started to appear immediately. The fridge and freezer, which stored meat and perishable supplies, had been off for hours. The food was starting to spoil. The irrigation system that kept the vegetable gardens running had stopped, compromising part of the vegetable crop. The cows were agitated from not hearing the regular sounds of the automated milking. And I was about to explode. I called a local electrician who confirmed, "This was cut with a pair of pliers. It was done on purpose. He even looked at me like, "You know who did it, right?" But said nothing. No need to. I went straight to Karen's house. I knocked on the door with more self-control than I thought I'd have. She appeared, again in a robe, and with a cup in hand, as if it were any lazy Sunday. "Hi," she said, with that falsely innocent tone that had become her trademark. "Did you cut the power cables to my property?" She raised her eyebrows. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about. Someone cut the power wires that run through the land, and the only person who has been making a fuss about this for weeks is you." She let out a dry laugh. "Well, if you had respected the boundaries of the fence, maybe you wouldn't have this kind of problem." That phrase was like gasoline on embers. "Are you admitting that you did this?" "I'm not admitting anything. I'm just saying that when you provoke certain situations, consequences come." Ah, there it was. Karen had just provided what any police officer would call a compromising statement. But of course, I couldn't just leave there and fix everything as if nothing had happened. That was a crime, and I was determined to take it to the fullest consequences. I went to the rural police office in town. I explained the case, brought photos of the cut wires, reports from the electrician, and described the behavior of my lovely neighbor. The officer, a veteran gentleman, listened to everything with the expression of someone who had dealt with a few Karens in the past. When I showed the recording of the conversation, yes, I was recording because I learned that any interaction needed proof, he simply nodded and said, "Let's take this seriously." But the best was yet to come. I remembered that I had installed new security cameras a week before. They covered part of the area near the fence, and although the lighting was low, they had night vision. I went to the system, pulled up the footage from the previous night, and there she was, dressed in a dark hoodie with a hood up, pliers in hand, walking straight towards the cables. No beating around the bush. She did the job and left as if she had just fed the cat. I paused the image at the frame where her face appeared. I looked for a few seconds. It was surreal. She had done it. She really had done it. With the recording in hand, I returned to the police station. When the officer watched the video, he let out a sigh that carried a mix of frustration and relief. Frustration at seeing someone reach this point. Relief at having the perfect evidence. He looked at me and said, "This will make a good case," and thus began a new phase. If before it was just a nuisance and drama over the fence, now it was a police matter, property damage, and a potential compensation that I would make sure to pursue penny by penny. Because one thing is having an annoying neighbor, a whole different story is having a weekend criminal with a backyard sheriff complex. And, honestly, she messed with the wrong guy. After seeing that footage, Karen, in her hoodie, cutting the wires with more precision than an action movie electrician, something in me changed. Anger gave way to calculated coldness. I no longer just wanted to solve the problem. Now I wanted to teach a lesson, the kind you learn by paying bills in long installments. The first thing I did was save the video in every possible format, backup on the computer, in the cloud, on a USB drive, and I even sent it to a lawyer friend. Because with this type of person, you never know, she could very well try to file a lawsuit back claiming defamation or invasion of privacy, even after committing a real crime. The most curious part was reviewing the footage calmly. Karen wasn't in a hurry. She walked confidently as if she thought she was doing justice with her own hands. She went straight to where the cables passed, cut them calmly, and walked back as if she had just gone to water the plants. She didn't even try to hide it. This only confirmed what I already suspected. In her mind, she was in the right. The next day, I returned to the police station. This time, with everything well organized. Photos of the damage, an electrician's report, an estimate of the losses, screenshots of the messages she sent me with veiled threats, and of course, the holy grail of idiocy, the video. The officer in charge watched the video again, with the same skeptical and tired look of someone who has seen a lot in their career, but still is astonished by the level of human absurdity. When it ended, he looked at me and said, "She dug her own grave, with pliers." He explained that, with the evidence in hand, the case would move to a formal investigation. It was possible to sue her for trespassing, vandalism, and sabotage of rural infrastructure, which, under local law, could result in heavy fines and even criminal charges. And yes, electrical damage in rural areas is serious business, especially since it can affect production, food storage, and even compromise safety. Meanwhile, Karen went on with her life as if nothing had happened. She continued her routine of amateur spying and silent judgment, unaware that she was about to be hit with a lawsuit worthy of a legal reality show. A few days later, I was called in for a formal statement. I arrived at the police station with that feeling of, I'm doing the right thing. The officer who attended to me this time already had the initial report and evidence in hand. He listened to me attentively, asked for technical details about the damage, and took notes with the patience of a monk. At the end, he said, "She will receive a visit soon." And she did. 3 days later, early in the morning, I saw the police car stopping in front of her house. 2 officers knocked on the door, and the scene was worthy of a mental replay for months. Karen, in a nightgown, barefoot, trying to maintain her composure while the officers explained the reason for their visit. She was trying to gesture, vehemently denying everything, but the officers were calm, methodical, like someone who already knows the fish is caught in the net. Minutes later, one of the officers knocked on my door. He wanted to confirm the position of the cables and review the wiring route with me. I showed him everything, including maintenance records and the electrical layout of the property. He smirked and said, "You're more prepared than many lawyers." The investigation moved quickly. The evidence was robust, and the video of her cutting the wires was the kind of material no lawyer could defend convincingly. Her lawyer, because yes, she hired one, tried to argue that she thought the wires were illegally invading her property. But surprise, they weren't. The wiring was well within legal limits, something easily proven with municipal records and satellite images. It was a self-inflicted wound, complete with sound effects. Karen even tried to maintain the theatrics until the last moment. She claimed she felt persecuted, that she was just protecting her family, and that she was driven to the limit by the constant noise and visual disturbances caused by the neighboring agricultural activity. Yes, visual. She complained about seeing my crops from her window. But in court, there's no neighbor's opinion that can override high-resolution video with time, date, and ambient sound. When the judge saw the video, his expression was pretty much the same as mine, a mix of indignation and second-hand embarrassment. And it was there, at that moment, that everything turned. I was no longer at the mercy of Karen. Now, she was in my game, and the next move would be costly. If there's one thing Karen never expected, it was that someone from the bush could be so organized, so patient, and so vindictive within the law. Because you see, I'm a quiet man. I love my land, my animals, and my peace. But if you cut my wires, try to sabotage me, and do it with that typical air of superiority of someone who thinks they're immune to consequences, you're asking for justice. And that's exactly what she received. With interest. The process officially began when my lawyer, a serious, discreet bloke with a sense of humor drier than an outback summer, filed the action. We approached it from 2 angles, a criminal action for damage to private property and a civil action for operational losses. We calculated everything, from the cost of repairing the wires to the spoiled meat in the freezer, not forgetting the downtime in production and the stress caused to the animal. The outcome, $50,000 in compensation. A round number, a number she would never forget. The first hearing was set at a local court, and despite being a simple session, the atmosphere felt like a soap opera. I, in a dress shirt and work boots, sat next to my lawyer, everything printed, cataloged, and organized in labeled folders. Karen arrived late, accompanied by a recently graduated lawyer who looked like he'd been hired by Facebook, or, I don't know, recommended by a friend from a WhatsApp group. She wore a flashy jacket, her hair tied back haphazardly, and had that look of someone who still thought it was all a misunderstanding. For the first few minutes, she remained haughty. She said she didn't know the wires were on his property, that she was just trying to protect her property, and shockingly, that she cut them accidentally, thinking it was a loose cable. The judge, a grizzled man, impassive, simply listened. Calmly, the defense tried to invalidate the video, claiming it was obtained without consent. My lawyer, with all the calm in the world, explained, "The cameras were on my property, pointing at my land, and captured someone trespassing and committing a crime." The judge just nodded and said, "Proceed." When the video was shown in court, the atmosphere changed. Karen, who had been trying to maintain her composure, shrank in her chair. The images showed everything clearly: the sneaky walk, the cut, the escape. The soundtrack could have been from a spy movie, but the reality was comical. A clumsy crime, executed by a woman who clearly thought she was untouchable. After that, the argument turned into mere formality. The judge asked for the proof of damages, which of course were all there, stamped and signed. The electrician's report, the list of losses from the refrigerated stock, the veterinary report detailing the impact on the animal. Everything documented, everything irrefutable. The sentence came 2 weeks later. The judge didn't mince words. He declared Karen guilty of intentional damage to private property and awarded the $50,000 compensation, in addition to ordering her to cover the legal costs of the case. Basically, she would have to pay not only for the crime, but also for making me waste time. And you know what? When I received the official notice of the decision, I confess, I opened a beer, sat on the porch, and toasted to myself. It was more than a victory. It was poetic justice served cold, with a taste of well-executed rural revenge. But of course, the drama didn't end there. Karen didn't accept defeat in silence. In the following days, she spread around the neighborhood that she was a victim of a sexist persecution, that the system was unfair, and that she was being punished for trying to defend what was hers. But you see, the neighbors were already fed up with her. Everyone had some story about Karen, pointless complaints, gossip, threats. In just a few months, she achieved what no one wants, becoming a persona non grata in the bush. With the fine knocking at her door, and a reputation dirtier than a tractor wheel on a rainy day, she finally gave in. She put the house up for sale. She disguised it as a change of plans, but everyone knew she was fleeing from embarrassment and the bills. And for me, it was the end of a cycle. The fence became just a fence again. The silence, once guarded, returned to being just silence. And the electric cables? They're still there, reinforced with a little sign next to them. Private property, active cameras, smile, you're being sued. Because out here in the bush, we may be simple, but we're not fools. After the court ruling and the hefty fine, Karen became different. Not that she regretted it, let's not be naive, but visibly shaken by the reality that knocked on her door with a bill for $50,000 and the seal of the Australian justice. Her reign of rural terror ended not with fireworks, but with disapproving glances, for sale signs, and a hasty move. She spent the following weeks avoiding any eye contact. The woman who once made a point of standing guard, arms crossed at the fence, now walked hunched over, wearing a low cap, as if she wanted to disappear into her own body. When the moving truck arrived, no one offered to help. No neighbor came to wish her good luck on the new journey. No one showed up with an apple pie. Karen left as she lived, surrounded by animosity and grumbling. The most ironic part? The for sale sign stayed up for months. No one wanted to buy. The house had a terrible reputation. A real estate agent even discreetly asked me if the stories about the previous neighbor were true. I smiled and said, "Oh, you have no idea." The sale only happened when a young couple from the city decided to gamble on a quieter life. Before finalizing the deal, they came to visit me. We exchanged some good words. They asked, "What was the former resident like?" I couldn't resist. I replied, "Let's just say, she confused common sense with an electric fence." They laughed, and they bought. From there on, the atmosphere in the area changed. It was as if the farm was breathing again. Without the accusations, the strange watchings, the passive-aggressive messages, peace returned in full force. I organized a welcome barbecue for the new neighbors. Everyone showed up. People I didn't even know lived so close turned up with salad, beer, and meat. It was there that I realized the extent of the collective relief. It wasn't just mine. Karen had bothered a lot of people. And of course, there was the most symbolic moment of all. When I rebuilt the fence, just as it had always been, but with a new sign. It read, "Respect is the best boundary between neighbors." Life returned to normal. The sound of the tractor became just work noise again, not a trigger for arguments. The garden recovered. The cows returned to calmness. And I, honestly, regained my enjoyment of mornings. For the first time in months, I had coffee on the porch, without the feeling of being watched by judgmental eyes, hidden behind a floral curtain. Sometimes someone still mentions Karen in a joking tone. I remember when she almost called the police because the dog barked? Or, imagine if she saw this loud noise now. We laugh, because now it's just that. A joke among friends, with no more threats or reports. Karen is gone. The tension left with her. And me? I stayed. With the land, the wires reconnected. A clear conscience, and a story worth more than many films. In the end, after all the rural drama with power cuts, poorly written threat letters, and sessions of passive-aggressive surveillance, there's that inevitable question. What did I learn from all this? Besides, of course, never to underestimate the destructive power of pliers in the wrong hands. So here it goes. 5 lessons I took from this experience. Useful, sarcastic, and tested in the field. Literally. Always have cameras. Always. It may seem paranoid, but in practice, it's pure common sense. The cameras not only gave me peace of mind, but they were the main weapon to unmask Karen. If it weren't for the recording, she might still be planting bananas on my property today, claiming that the fence is oppressive. Recording everything gives you evidence, and more than that, it gives you power. Because an argument can be debated. Video shuts them up. Never underestimate a loud person with free time. Karen had no job, no kids at home, no hobbies, and an ego the size of Queensland itself. This combination is dangerous. People like that live to create problems. If you encounter someone like that, know you've become their life project. And if you react in kind, you lose. Keep a cool head and the evidence hot. Lawyers are expensive, but Karen is even more expensive. When I spoke with my lawyer, I quickly heard, "Do you want to resolve this, or do you want to win?" I chose to win, and it was worth every cent, because paying for competent legal assistance is much cheaper than letting someone like Karen do whatever they want. And in the end, I even made her foot the bill, which makes it all the more satisfying. You don't win by fighting with Karen. You win by exposing Karen. Arguing with that kind of person is useless. She will twist everything, use phrases like, "I was just trying to help," or "Nobody listens to me." But when you bring the facts to light, the recordings, the reports, then there's no crying that can save her. Karens can't stand the light. They thrive on chaos. Exposing them with evidence is like switching off their emotional Wi-Fi. Don't be a Karen or a Bogan Karen, please. This may be the most valuable lesson. Sometimes, without realizing it, we slide into the complaining, controlling, judgmental side. The line between caring for your space and thinking you run the world can be thin. Karen crossed it like a runaway kangaroo. Don't make that mistake. Live and let live. Respect is a two-way street, and if your neighbor's life bothers you more than your own, maybe the problem is you. In the end, Karen's story became an anecdote, but the learning was real, and if you've made it this far, here's the invitation. Be the kind of neighbor you would like to have, because you never know. One day, Karen might be on the other side of the fence, or worse, inside your house. So that's it. A story that started with a tractor running at 7 in the morning and ended with a $50,000 fine and the strategic escape of a defeated Karen. A complete cycle of chaos, security cameras, and rural karma. Karen thought she could reign through shouting, measuring tape, and arrogance. She thought she could cut the wires of my farm like pruning a rose bush. But she forgot one detail. Don't mess with someone who knows the land and their own rights. In the end, she not only lost the war, but had to finance the celebration. And if there's one thing this story proves, it's that revenge, when done with evidence, patience, and a good lawyer, is indeed fulfilling, tasty, and highly educational. A legal receipt has a special taste when accompanied by silence in the neighborhood and a barbecue without complaints. But now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had an experience with a Karen? That neighbor who acts like they're the supreme authority of the street? Have you faced any absurd situation worthy of becoming a video script? Share in the comments. I read them all. And if the story is good, who knows? It might become the next video, huh? Oh, and if you enjoyed this rural epic, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share with that friend who needs inspiration to deal with unbearable people. Because in the end, laughing at a Karen is therapeutic. But seeing a Karen being defeated with class, justice, and receipt in hand, that's art.